Hi guys, welcome to the AP Live tonight. Where's all my people? Are you here yet? I'm a little bit late. I had some problems getting logged in. Let me know when you get here. Drop a comment in the comment section. I was a little bit late logging on. Sorry about that. Tonight, focus. There we go. Let me know when y'all get here. Drop a comment. Hey, Samuel, how's it going? Good to see you. Tonight, we're going to review some information about the revolutions as well as the Enlightenment. So you guys are ready for tomorrow. Hey, Ethan, how's it going? Sorry, I'm a little late. I had some problems getting logged on. I had to switch accounts and it was kind of crazy. So anyway, I am here now. Hello, Isabella. How's it going, everybody? All right, so we're going to get started. That way we can get off and rolling right away. We're going to first talk a little bit about the Enlightenment and how it influences the revolution. Okay, remember the key ideas of the Enlightenment. We have liberty. We have social contract. Remember, social contract is that agreement between the governments and the people, or the government and the people, so that the people give up a little bit of their freedom in order to have safety and protection from the government. Liberty, of course, we know that's the same thing as freedom. Let's see, what are some other ideas? Natural rights. That was a right or a idea that came from John Locke. He said your natural rights were life, liberty, and property. We looked at that in the documents. But then Thomas Jefferson changes it to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We also have Montesquieu. He was the one that came up with the separation of powers. Remember, this is going to be your executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. He said if they are separated, then they don't have as much, one person or one entity doesn't have all the power. Hi, Ethan. Good to see you guys. Welcome to the live. So we're just kind of reviewing some things right now about the Enlightenment and how it will influence the revolutions. The Enlightenment is going to influence all of the revolutions. So if you're asked for a similarity tomorrow, that's a good similarity to talk about. And then you want to be able to give examples from each one of the revolutions about how the Enlightenment influenced it, right? So for the American Revolution, it's super simple. It's basically, Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, everything that is set up for the government, our separation of powers, all those things would be direct examples of how the American Revolution was influenced by the Enlightenment. Hi, Peter. Welcome. Good to see you. French Revolution, we have the document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. That would definitely be a result of the Enlightenment. So that could be an example from the French Revolution. And Haiti and Latin America both are fighting for liberties against the oppression of a tyrannical government or like an overlord of government. And so that could be your influence from the Enlightenment there. All right, so talking about liberty with both of those. Hi, Juan. Welcome. Just reviewing the Enlightenment here real quick, and then we're going to hop right into the revolutions. I think all of your classes are doing the Socratic seminar tomorrow, so I want you guys to be ready so you look really, really intelligent and smart about this stuff. Okay. So let's get going on the American Revolution. I'm not going to go over the actual revolution so much because you should know this by now. You should know about the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre and the things that led up to it. Your big thing you want to remember about the American Revolution is that during the 17th and the 18th centuries, so that would be 1600s, 1700s, the colonies are allowed some local autonomy. Local autonomy means that they can govern locally a little bit themselves. The British don't have complete control at that time. They do allow some local governments to control things. All right. This will eventually lead to their downfall, though, because the American colonies are kind of like doing this on their own a little bit. And so they kind of get used to that. And then when Britain comes in and wants more control, they're like, no, we're good. We were handling it on our own, right? So that happens around the 1760s. This is when the British come in and they want more tax money. And the reason they want more tax money is to pay for their wars against France. So that's important to remember. And that's when they start imposing all those new taxes, like the Stamp Act and the tax on tea, all right? Colonists, once again, are not represented in the British Parliament. This upsets them. So they come up with that slogan, no taxation without representation. You can mention that tomorrow in the Socratic seminar. Okay, let's go on. So basically, the reason why it was so offensive that they weren't allowed representation is because the colonists look at themselves as British. So when the British say, no, you're not allowed to be in Parliament at all, that kind of makes them look like, wait, what? We're not British? But we are. And the British are like, yeah, but we don't want you to be in Parliament. You're backwater colonists. You don't really know how to govern. Just leave the governing to us. And that's very offensive to them because they're looking at themselves as British, even though they're in the colonies. So they feel like they should have a say. All right. So these taxes are going to challenge colonial economic interest. They will also attack colonial local autonomy, which is like governing themselves, and they don't like that. So, effects of the American Revolution. Make sure you get these down. The political power is going to remain in the hands of the elite. So, it doesn't really give minorities very much power, such as poor white men, women, Native Americans, Africans. It doesn't give them much power. The power pretty much stays in the elite white man's hands. But it's different. It's not across the sea. It would be in America. It also creates an independent government, based on democratic ideals. And we have the U.S. Constitution put in place, which is influenced by the Enlightenment, specifically the Bill of Rights. Remember, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments. Those would be the ones about no quartering troops and the right to bear arms, the right to freedom of speech and religion. All that stuff would be in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, and that's inspired by the Enlightenment. So that is the gist of the American Revolution. Does anybody have any questions about the American Revolution? You're not going to really have to know how it was fought or any of the battles or anything like that. Basically, you just need to know the ideals of it. You might be asked about guerrilla warfare. So that's one other thing that we talked about in class. The British at the time fought by lining up and marching towards each other. This side would shoot first. While they reload, this side would shoot. Wasn't a very good way to fight because you're going to die if you're in the first couple rows, right? And the colonists had not practiced this. They had not been taught how to fight like this. So they steal guerrilla warfare from the Native Americans, and they start fighting by like sneak attacks and hiding and creeping up on the British. And that is really successful for them. There's a movie that was made, I think it was in the 2000s. I think it came out after I graduated high school. Man, that makes me feel really old. But anyway, it's called The Patriot, and it's really good. It's got some parts that's not historically accurate, but for the most part, you can see how that fighting happened, and it's based on the life of Francis Marion, who used guerrilla warfare down in the South. So you might want to check that out because it's really good. Okay, so if we don't have any questions about the American Revolution, we're going to go on to the French Revolution. That's the one that happens next. And the French Revolution is going to happen after the American Revolution. We had some French come over for the American Revolution to help. Remember Marquis de Lafayette? He brought troops with him when he came. Those troops are going to return to France, and some of them will even fight in the French Revolution. So they kind of get some of these democratic ideas and take them back to France with them. The French government at this time, before the revolution, they're facing bankruptcy. And the king calls the assembly and he says, hey, we need to reform the tax system and we need to raise taxes. The problem is that the reforms the elite didn't like, because what happened was when they tried to reform it, it favored more of the majority. Remember, we have the third estate. The third estate's the majority. The elite, the first two estates, are only 2% of the population. And that 2% was like, we don't really want to pay any more in taxes. We feel like you should have to pay the most taxes. And the third estate is like, hey, this isn't fair because we're the majority, we're the poorest, and why should we have to pay the bulk of the taxes? So that's where this big problem comes in. All right, so in 1789, the Estates General convenes, and the third estate breaks off and declares themselves the National Assembly at that time. And they say, all right, we are going to be separate. They write the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Remember, Marquis de Lafayette helps with this, and it's fashioned somewhat off of the Declaration of Independence because he was familiar with that document from being in America. And they start the revolution at this time. Okay, so you can talk about how the Declaration of the Rights of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen are based off of and influenced by the American Revolution as well as the Enlightenment. French women are more active in this revolution than American women were. All right, so that's a difference. You always want to pay attention to those differences. The French women were actually the ones who stormed Versailles asking for bread. There were about 7,000 of them that stormed Versailles, and they were looking for Marie Antoinette. Remember, I told you about how when they took King Louis and Marie Antoinette to Paris, that all started with about 7,000 women storming Versailles. So the women actually got really active in the French Revolution, so much so that the men kind of scared them a little bit. They were kind of like, we don't really want the women to be in government. And after the revolution ends, they're going to pass some laws to keep women out of government. But it is interesting that they got very involved during that dangerous time in France. For the women in America, it wasn't that they weren't involved, they just weren't directly involved. One of the most famous quotes is from Abigail Adams, and it was a letter to her husband, John Adams, that said, "Remember the ladies." Basically, she was saying, hey, when you go and you start making the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all these things, and you start forming our government, don't forget the women in the mix. And they kind of did. But at least she tried, right? All right. So the March on Versailles, Juan, that's what I was just talking about there. That's basically when the women of France had just had enough. They were starving to death. They wanted more. They wanted bread. And so they basically march on Versailles, and they're so forceful in doing that it ends up the king and queen are taken to Paris as a result. And basically, as they're marching on Versailles, they're demanding bread for their families. Okay. Let's see. Another difference is that the French Revolution is driven by social conflicts between social classes, whereas the American Revolution wasn't. It was more of the elite driving it, the elite wanting their independence from Britain. Also, remember, it wasn't all the people in the American colonies. There were some who stayed loyal to the king, and they were called Loyalists. So remember, it wasn't all of them. The French Revolution is also more violent than the American Revolution, so that is a big difference. As well as, at the end, the king and queen get executed. So that's another difference, because the American Revolution, the king stays alive. And if you've seen Hamilton, the king sings a very awesome song. It's one of my favorites of all of Hamilton, about the American Revolution. So if you haven't heard the soundtrack of Hamilton, you might want to give it a listen. It's pretty good. Okay, then after the revolution, we have the Reign of Terror, where Robespierre comes to power, and about 17,000? I think it's 17,000 people that they guillotine, and 200,000 around there that they arrest. And so at that time, it's just a very scary time for anyone who might be against the revolution. And at the end, Robespierre gets guillotined as well. So it wasn't a very good ending for him either. Eventually, Napoleon Bonaparte is going to come to power. Now, this would be one of the effects of the French Revolution that you can talk about in the Socratic seminar. So make sure you write this down. He takes power in 1799, and he keeps social equality, but he gets rid of liberty. And he starts to conquer Europe. He basically wants to get more land, build an empire, as well as spread the ideas of the French Revolution throughout Europe. So he imposes his revolutionary practices on the regions that he conquers. For example, he ends feudalism in those regions, and he gives equal rights to men. He insists on religious tolerance. He starts to help codify laws, and this causes a lot of resentment towards the French because the other European areas don't really like this domineering attitude that he comes in and conquers and takes over. And so this is the first time that we see some nationalism rise up. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but nationalism is basically like a love for your culture and your nation and your ethnic group and basically like your background, okay? And this is the first time that this is really happening, this idea that you are a part of something bigger than yourself kind of thing. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But that's definitely an effect of the French Revolution is nationalism. Hi, Lana. Good to see you. Welcome in. Okay, so that's the basics of the French Revolution. Let's go on to the Haitian Revolution. After the French Revolution happens, the Haitian colony, well, at the time it was called Saint Dominique, they're a colony of France. And they're looking at this and they're saying, wait a minute, we kind of really want our freedom because you guys got your freedom, so why can't we have our freedom? Now, the Haitian Revolution is really complicated. And the reason it's complicated is because there's 4 different groups and they all kind of want a different thing, okay? So we have the Grand Blancs. And this is how you spell it. They are the rich white folk in Haiti. Then we have the Petite Blancs. These would be like the merchants, the lawyers, and poor whites. Under them, we have, let me spell it right. I want to make sure I get it. Okay, I didn't put down the Spanish word. So under them would be the free colored, and under them are the slaves. Now, these groups want different things. The Grand Blancs, they want more power. They want more autonomy for themselves. But they don't think that the Petite Blancs should be equal to them. And they definitely don't think that these lower classes should be equal to them. The Petite Blancs, of course, they want more autonomy and power too, but they also don't think that these classes are equal to them, okay? The free colored, some of those were former slaves, and some of them are just mixed race. And then, of course, we know what slaves are. So we have these 4 groups, and they're kind of like going up against each other. They can't really like agree on one thing, right? Because these 2 groups don't want these 2 groups to have rights. And of course, these groups want to have rights. So they're not going to help each other. If they would have all helped each other, then they would have won the revolution way sooner. You also have to remember that the slaves are the majority. Out of all the people that are in Haiti, they are the majority. Okay, so let's see. The revolution starts with these factions kind of warring against each other, And then the slaves get the upper hand, and they are led by Toussaint. So you can put his name down. Toussaint leads them to a successful slave revolt. This is the first successful slave revolt in world history. Actually, it's the only completely successful one. And so after the revolution is over, complete equality is declared for everyone. The whites pretty much leave because at this point, they're really, really scared. Several of them were murdered and, taken out during the revolution. And so the ones that survived, they decide to leave and go to a different island. And the slaves are completely free and equal, and they start their government. Okay. It also inspires other slave rebellions. So put that down as an effect of this revolution. It scares white people everywhere because they're worried that their slaves are going to hear about this and want to revolt. And the last effect of this revolution is Napoleon's defeat pretty much talks him into selling the Louisiana Purchase to the United States because he needs money. So that's how we end up with the Louisiana Purchase. Toussaint is kind of spelled like that. I don't know if I have the spelling or not. I think, here it is. It's Toussaint. Hold on. Toussaint. There you go. Toussaint. Yes, there we go, Juan. Thank you so much. I like saying his name. It's kind of cool. Toussaint. Anybody want to change their name to Toussaint? No? Okay. Maybe we'll start calling Juan that. That'd be a good nickname. All right. So let's talk about the Latin American revolutions. Latin American revolutions happen later after the Haitian Revolution. And basically, we talked about how Simón Bolívar, he travels all over and he's kind of like getting ideas about revolutions from all the places where it has happened. And in the Latin American countries, we have the native-born elites. They're called Creoles. And we talked about this morning in my class. The Creoles are mixed African and mixed Spanish and African. Yes, that's the Creoles. So they are the elites. They're native-born. They would be the Spanish who are born in Latin America. There we go. I got it right. There are so many different ethnic groups. It's hard to keep them all straight. Okay, so they are the elite in the Spanish colonies, and they are offended by the Spanish monarchy. Basically, they feel like the Spanish monarchy is exerting too much control over them. These were like limited revolutions at first because in Latin America, the locals didn't have a lot of local autonomy the way they did in North America, and so they weren't experienced in running the government. This revolution, these will be the Latin American revolutions, okay? And there's a couple, we just kind of chunk them all together. So it'd be like Venezuela, Mexico. Okay. The society in Latin America is also very strict as far as class divisions. So the classes are strictly divided. They do not mix as much as they do in other areas. Yes, that too, Ethan. All of them. You don't necessarily have to know the differences between all the separate ones, just kind of the Latin American revolutions as a whole. Whites were also vastly outnumbered in Latin America, so that's important to note. In 1808, that's when Napoleon invades Spain, and he kind of puts the royal authority in disarray. And this is the time that Latin America kind of is pushed into a revolution because since the Spanish royal powers is such a mess, they kind of have to start governing themselves. Okay, so it was definitely a longer process than what happens in North America. The leaders of the revolution really start to appeal to the lower classes, and they're worried that the lower classes, if they're not appealed to, will try to overthrow them. So that's why they're trying to get the lower classes on board. Fun fact, Simon Bolivar got the idea of the revolution during his travels to study in France. That's right, Isabella. That's true. And he also studied a little bit in North America, and he had European tutors, which is interesting as well. Napoleon's classmates hated his guts. Didn't know about that. Okay, so you can also write down that it became impossible to unite the Spanish colonies the way that the North American colonies were united after the Revolution. And the biggest reason is because there were such strong regional ties in the Spanish colonies. After the independence movements, all right, this is a big difference. After the independence movements in the U.S. grew more stable and more wealthy, whereas in the South American countries, they were unstable and not as wealthy. They remained somewhat poorer. So it's a different outcome than what we saw in the Americas. Okay, so long-term effects of the revolution. This is also helpful for your Socratic seminar tomorrow. Long-term effects, it's going to influence smaller revolutions in Europe. It will also start to influence more voting rights for males. So there was all kinds of guidelines about how if you wanted to vote as a male, you had to own property. And, of course, there's an age that you can vote and all that. And so eventually that will be extended so that all males will be able to vote whether or not they have property or not. It also influences abolitionists. Abolitionists are the ones that are going to fight slavery, okay? Because clearly all men are created equal at the time did not mean all men. It meant all white men, right? And so the abolitionists are going to start taking these ideas from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and they're going to say, hey, we need to apply this to the Africans as well. These are effects of all the revolutions, Ethan. Very good question. All the revolutions. Okay. It's also going to influence nationalism. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then feminist movements as well. So we'll see in the 1900s, women are going to start fighting for the right to vote, and they will look back to these ideas of the Enlightenment as well as the ideas of the Revolution, and they'll say, hey, we were forgotten in that, and now it is our turn. Okay, so that will also be a long-term effect. Eventually, this will lead to the abolition of slavery and getting rid of it altogether. And it also leads to nationalism. So we have two different things. We have nations and nationalism. What's the difference? Okay, so ideas that humans are divided into separate nations with a distinct culture and territory. That's what would make up a nation. Your culture and territory and your language. That's a nation, okay? Also, people are starting to accept this idea because remember, during the Enlightenment and these revolutions, science is weakened. I'm sorry, opposite. Science weakens religion. Religion is not quite as strong because remember, all of the divine right of kings and the things that the kings were teaching the people comes from religion, and now science is weakening that a little bit. And so now people are starting to say, oh, okay, well, maybe we don't have to be loyal to a king. Maybe we don't have to be loyal to this vast empire. Maybe we can be loyal to a nation instead. So old loyalties start to die out and nations become more likable, more acceptable, you could say. Nationalism also comes into play and becomes a little bit more powerful in the 1800s, all right? This is where there's kind of like a reawakening of old cultures and people starting to like remember what they identify with as far as like a people group, all right? So we'll see these nationalist movements specifically in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire reaches all the way up and for a long time into the 1900s, right? And so It's huge, and it's got all these different ethnic groups in it. And nationalism comes and kind of sprouts around the people, and they're like, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be this big empire anymore. Maybe we should be our separate little nation groups. So nationalism is like this love for your country and wanting to be separate based on your culture and ethnic group. Does everybody understand the difference between the two? I hope I explained it good enough. All right. Also, nationalism inspires political unity in Germany and Italy. And it inspires separatist movements. Basically, people start to identify with their ethnic group instead of the empire as a whole. And so we'll see this when we talk into the 1900s. We'll get there probably next month. It also will start to fuel pre-existing rivalries in Europe. We have Britain and France definitely don't like each other. There's a lot of political rivalries between the different nations. And so nationalism kind of spurs that on because they want to be better than their other political rivalries. So basically tomorrow you're going to be asked in the Socratic seminar different questions about the revolutions. Make sure that you take these notes. I'm going to let my students use their notes. I'm not sure about the other teachers, but just look back through these notes and remember the key things about each one of the revolutions. And once again, you don't have to necessarily remember the specifics about the revolutions, like how they fought and things, but more about the ideas and the philosophies behind them. Big similarity is that all the revolutions were influenced by the Enlightenment. So that is definitely a point that you can drive home all day long. You can talk about that, and you can give examples of the documents. One of the documents that we looked at today was the Jamaican letter, and that one was from Simon Bolivar, and that's basically him writing to Jamaica asking for assistance, and he uses some of the Enlightenment ideas within that letter. So you could use that as an example. That's called the Jamaican letter. All right, does anybody have any quick questions before we hop off of here? I know this is just a short live, but I want to give you guys some time to look through these notes and kind of memorize them a little bit more so that you've got some talking points tomorrow when you go for the Socratic seminar. So if you don't have any other questions, just make sure that you have subscribed. I know most of you have, and turn on those notifications so that you don't miss a thing, because I will start doing lives probably on Tuesdays again or Wednesday. I don't know which night is more, which one's better for you guys. Let me know in the comments, and we'll kind of work it out that way. If you want me to, I will also post it on my Instagram. That's Time Machine Teacher on Instagram. So you can follow that as well. And then that way you won't miss when I'm going to be doing a live. Effects of Latin America were all the ones that I just went over. All those effects pretty much are like the bubble over all of the revolutions. One that's just specific for Latin America, though, Ethan, is that the Latin American countries never really become stable. They're never able to get a grasp on their government. And one of the reasons is because the colonies don't come together and unite the way that North America does. North America doesn't have as many class differences and ethnic groups as South America did. And so the South American colonies don't ever really come together and become strong. So you could say that that's one effect that's just on Latin America. But all those other effects would work too. And I don't know that you'll ever have to really differentiate between the two. So you should be good. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to sign off here. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram so that you know when a live is coming up. I will see you tomorrow. You are so welcome. I'm hopeful that it helped you and that you're going to rock out on the Socratic seminar tomorrow. I know you can do it. Just make sure and look over these notes. Memorize this information so that you can apply it tomorrow. All right. I will see you later. Have a good one.